So Anna's going to be presenting today. Anna is actually the one of the top three database presenters, or DBA, DB2 presenters from GSE UK's event in November 2023. Fantastically insightful, very, very, educated and very talented especially for such a young age. Anna's a great speaker for us to have, especially from 101, in that kind of representation of kind of, you can be young and be talented, and you can inspire other young people. So I know obviously we have a lot of students who attend the 101 sessions. And this session today is the GenZ experience of DB2 installation on zOS. I mean, as someone who's never understood that or how it works, I personally am fascinated to see what happens. So Anna, please take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, thank you for the kind words. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you're listening in the world. It's about 7:30 where I'm at, so I'm excited that I get to kick off my morning with this. So I'm going to be talking about my experience with the DB213 installation. And so this session is going to be, for early career hires or those who are new to IBM-Z, that are learning more about DB2 for zOS or wanting to know more about zOS in general. This is going to be a walkthrough of the DB2 installation that I did, sprinkled with my experience, as well as the challenges, considerations, and key takeaways that I learned. For those of you who might have a lot of experience with this platform and this technology in this session, maybe this session could help provide, some insight into what your new to IBM-Z coworkers may be thinking about, or, what they have in their head and how you can help them along in their journey. I welcome, your comments, your opinions, your questions throughout the session. You can just put them in the chat box. So my name is Anna McKee, and I work for IBM, and I am a technical enablement specialist. And prior to joining IBM, I was a two-time winner of the Master the Mainframe contest, and it's since been rebranded to zXplore. But whenever I was doing Master the Mainframe, it was a yearly worldwide contest for students to gain IBM-Z skills. And I actually learned about the Master the Mainframe program through my university, which had mainframe technical courses sprinkled throughout the curriculum. I am a part of the IBM-Z ISV Center. We support independent software vendors and their development of their products. Some of you in the audience may be using some of our services, such as ADCD, ZDNT, ZPDT, or if you have participated in the IBM academic initiative, such as zXplore, you're using our systems, and you're using the DB2 that I set up. And I manage all of the DB2 for zOS subsystems on my team. And the DB2s that I install are propagated all over the world. DB2 systems programmer is not the only hat I wear. I am also a general zOS systems programmer, but I tend to gravitate towards the DB2 systems programming aspect of my job. So I don't think I have an original experience with my hiring journey with IBM. I feel like there are a lot of other new to Z people that are, in similar shoes. When I first hired on with IBM, they were looking for someone to learn more about DB2 for zOS. And I already had a little bit of experience with relational databases. I graduated with a degree in business analytics. So naturally, I was looking forward to learning more about this technology. There were two people that managed DB2 on my team. They were both highly experienced. They had over 30 years in the industry, and they both announced their retirement the second week that I was working at IBM. So I guess they got sick of me pretty quickly. But luckily, I did have about 5 months to learn from them. I was in the office at 6 a.m. trying to learn what the heck is Db2 for zOS and retain as much as I possibly could. During that time, I gained a lot of mentors in the Db2 development lab and just throughout IBM. I had to, or else it would have been really tough for me to take over this role without having, a whole lot of support. And documentation can get you pretty far, but it doesn't replace firsthand experience or breaking down a topic into analogies if I'm not understanding something. So really with that hunger of wanting to know more and understand other people's experiences and knowledge, I was able to install my first Db2 version 13, when it first went GA in 2022. And it is currently being used today in the IBM Z ISV Center. And with that, we're going to get into today's session. So on our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about the planning and system preparation that is needed for Db2 installation. We'll do a high-level overview of what Shop Z is and what SMPE installation is. And then we'll get into the meat of the presentation with Db2 installation. We'll talk a little bit about zOS customizations, the DSN TIN STC list that needs to be executed, installing and submitting the JCL to set up the subsystem, some of Db2 and its friends, and then starting the subsystem and testing. And then we'll also get into a little bit about, the key takeaways that I learned from the process and maybe some additional information that could help you along with your journey. So I want to start with telling you a little bit about why there was a need for the Db213 in the environment that I'm working in, and then also a little bit about the environment itself. Db2 for zOS went GA in 2022, and GA meaning general availability. So essentially means it was available to the public to access and to download. My team delivers package systems to independent software vendors, and these systems are development environments for ISVs to test their products. One of our responsibilities is to offer all IBM Z products and also keep all products, all operating systems and hardware current. So we're always on the latest maintenance cycle, always on the latest Z hardware and zOS software. And so with the release of Db2 version 13, it was my responsibility to ensure that our ISVs had access to that version so that we can enable them to be successful in what they do. Now, I will say I did outsource this chart to one of my coworkers, and he's probably the biggest goofball on my team. And maybe that was my mistake, because we see that we have some work files that are definitely not Doom game files. And then we have a typewriter that is hooked up to a Linux machine. So I guess the lesson learned here is if you want it done right, do it yourself. So anyways, moving on, there is a lot to unpack here. So let's start from the top. This is my environment, and my environment is highly virtualized. And this virtualization gives my team a lot of flexibility and control over the different physical system resources we can delegate to our customers. And to achieve this, we leverage the ZVM hypervisor. And a quick note on ZVM, it's one of the 5 operating system offerings from IBM that run on the Z architecture. And its primary role in my complex is to split the physical resources of our processors and storage amongst many guest operating systems. It runs on an LPAR and therefore is considered to be running first level. And every operating system I discuss moving forward runs inside this ZVM hypervisor as a guest or simply running second level. So in this diagram, you're going to notice that we have our customer end users there on the left. And they're going to connect to their guest operating systems to get their development work done. In the top right corner inside the ZVM box, you'll see a cluster of disks that live in a ZVM user ID, and we refer to those as holder IDs. And these holder IDs are a collection of virtual disks that contain the product code for Db2 for zOS version 13. And for instance, that dsnd10 is going to hold that version 13 code. And this is the production code that's going to get linked to the guest systems so that they can use, our end users can use the Db2 subsystem for their development needs. Best practices, we segregate the production code from the maintenance point. The maintenance point, you can see in the lower right-hand corner of the ZVM box, is a zOS system that is running second level. So for the remainder of this presentation, it's important to keep in mind that all of these steps that I'm performing for the Db2 installation are happening inside the zOS maintenance point. So you're probably wondering, why am I going over all of this? Aren't we here to talk about Db2 installation? The architecture of my complex is one of, if not the greatest factor that influences my team's installation and maintenance processes. And I think this context is really important to understand when we start getting into the specifics of the installation. So now that we have an idea of the environment that I'm working in, let's dive into the installation process. So just like with anything else in enterprise computing, a smooth installation starts with a great plan and lots of preparation. Now, there are a ton of considerations that are involved in the planning process. The more complex of an environment that you are in, the more considerations that you're going to have. And one of the first steps when planning is deciding what kind of installation that you are looking for. For my installation, the choice was clear for my environment, but that might not always be the case for you. For the installation method, there are two options. You can do a fresh install of the product code, or you can migrate. And in my environment, I did not have any existing data that I needed to move over to a more current level. So I went with a fresh installation of Db2 version 13. Since I do work in a development environment, most of the ISVs that I work with are able to recreate their database objects with their DDL very easily. So most of the time, my ISVs don't need to migrate their Db2 data, and they can just get a fresh instance and reinstall all of their code. For migrations, you're typically going to see this in production environments. You've got a lot of data that just can't be recreated again. And a migration is upgrading an existing instance of Db2 to a more current release, like going from Db2 version 12 to Db2 version 13. The data won't change. And then for installing, I installed a single instance of Db2, but you can also install or migrate your Db2 members that in a data sharing group. And you'll most likely find that in production environments, but we really won't get to that in this presentation. So as I said earlier, the more complex of your environment is, the more complex setting up these requirements will get. There are going to be hardware and software requirements. like being on zOS 2.4 or being on a ZEC12 or later. There's going to be PTFs that are required. We keep the maintenance hardware, software on our systems at the bleeding edge. So these things weren't really a big factor for me, but they may be for you in your environment. Another factor would be ensuring that you have the required authorization to perform the installation. For the Db2 installation, you will need at least the install sysopera authority. I had access to a full authority ID, which had authorization to any of the system resources that I may have needed that are protected by the system security server, which in my case was RACF. So I was able to have access to the IBM user ID, which essentially gave me the keys to the kingdom. You might have to designate tasks to other teams, such as security admins, network admins, US system admins, because you might not have the authority to do some of those tasks. I was a one-woman show, so I had to wear many hats through the installation process. And in a production shop, you might not have the same freedom of movement that I had working in a development environment. With storage requirements, the IBM Db2 version 13 installation and migration manual is your best friend. In there, you'll find recommendations and best practices when it comes to storage. And ultimately, the decisions you make here will boil down to one of two things, either what you need or what you can get. All right, so
Anna,
after you've, yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say, with respect to required authorization on your last slide, what are some things that you would recommend? Because as someone who is security administration and security engineering, sometimes we have I guess issues where I don't understand storage and maybe some storage people don't understand security, and there's miscommunications about what is needed, how long it's needed for, and things like access, like permission levels. So if you need to access a certain data set profiles, do you need alter access or update, or what are some things that you would recommend with that?
Yeah, well, so it really depends on the environment. Like, for instance, like what I said, like I had full authority. So it didn't really matter to me what security level that I had. But when you're in a production environment, it's definitely going to matter. So, and it really comes down to what your organization decides on what it can give you. So like your rack, or not RACF, but your security admin team is going to decide, what kind of privilege that you can get with having this Db2 installation. And more than likely, they're going to, give the, I would say more tenured workers probably the access that it needs, whoever is mainly doing the installation. But when it comes to, getting that authority, I think you just have to talk to your security admins to be able to see what kind of authority that they're willing to give you. And then if it's not enough authority, then making a case for yourself to be able to get that authority that you need to perform your job well.
Brilliant. No, that's fantastic. I totally agree.
All right, any other questions while we're here? Okay, great. All right, so after you have come up with your game plan, it's finally time to begin the installation process. And this is the SMPE installation process, which is different than the Db2 installation process. So just Db2, just like any other IBM program product, it's going to come from ShopZ. So let's talk a little bit about what ShopZ is, and then let's do a 10,000-foot overview of the SMPE installation process. My installation roadmap started at ShopZ. And ShopZ is an IBM web application that you can use to order zOS software products and services. when I went to download the product, the DB2 for zOS product, I had one of two options, CBPDO or server pack. My team does a lot of product installs. Like I said, we try to stay current with the IBM products so that ISVs can utilize new products and newer versions of products so that they can be successful. So our flow is to use CBPDO, which stands for Custom Built Product Delivery Option. And it is an entitled software delivery package consisting of uninstalled products and unintegrated services. So it's kind of a bare bones sort of package. Whereas with Server Pack, it's going to be this customer tailored install, and IBM's going to have performed some of the SMPE installation steps and then some of the post SMPE installation steps. So it's more of like a pre-packaged sort of thing. And I think that's more popular with clients, is to have a server pack. I don't really know of many people that still use CVPDO. But moving on to SMPE installation, it's not really in the scope to kind of go through a deep dive of SMPE installation since there's so much to that. But I do want to touch upon it just a little bit. So SMPE, it stands for System Modification Program Extended. And it's a tool you'll find in zOS for managing the installation of software products on the zOS system. And SMPE also tracks any and all modifications to those products. So if you're wondering where that name came from, modifications, it's right in the description. So when you're done ordering the product from ShopZ, you're going to get the product code and then also a program directory. And the program directory is going to give you step-by-step instructions on how to make the product code available to the system. And it's going to go a step-by-step instructions through the SMPE install. And to make that product code available, when you're doing that SMPE install, you're going to do things like allocate target and distribution libraries, adding the code into these libraries, defining ZFSs and creating mount points in OMVS, defining DD-defs, and so on and so forth. And again, my aim here isn't, to turn you all into SMPE SMEs in like 5 minutes or less, but just to give you an idea and be aware that there is an important prerequisite for getting to the DB2 installation process. So now we're kind of getting into making the subsystem available. So the code is now available to the system. We just did our SMPE install, but just because we do our SMPE install doesn't mean that we can just start DB2 up. We now have to move on to the DB2 installation. And when I first started, I was really confused because you would think the SMPE installation means that, the product was ready to go. It's when you install something on Windows or Mac, it's ready to go. But there are two different installations involved. So the SMPE installation only makes the DB2 product code available to the system. The DB2 installation will make the subsystem usable. So when it comes to the DB2 installation, there are a few places in zOS that you're going to have to touch and make changes to. And this can be one of the trickier parts of the process. And this is mostly due to just how customizable zOS is. Your customizations are ultimately going to depend on how your zOS is configured, and your environment could look completely different than mine. For my installation, there were really three big areas that I needed to modify. Since I was kind of on my own here, I had the opportunity to become a better zOS systems programmer. And so now that I know we're getting, more into the zOS side of things, but I think it's worth visiting, at least these three areas, because making the necessary changes in zOS is critical to the DB2 installation process. So ParmLib. So each of the ParmLib members that you see on the screen will need to be added to a ParmLib dataset that is in your system's ParmLib concatenation. So let's back up a little bit and make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to ParmLib. ParmLib is one of the zOS system libraries that contains customization data that is essential to the good working order of the zOS system. It's a partitioned data set that contains control parameters for the whole system that take the form of members located inside of the PDS. And these members follow a mandatory naming convention, followed by a user-defined suffix of 2 characters, and are called during the IPL process by the system parameter list. So this picture on the right is a screenshot of the system parameter list, and it is made up of entries referred to as stanzas. And these stanzas are comprised of a comma delimited list of their respective ParmLib members. So it's kind of hard to see, but those ParmLib members lists in each stanza are made up of only the suffix of each member. So to kind of walk the dog on this, let's say we have a member called bpx parm db. You'll see in that OMVS stanza, I have the db suffix in that line. And what the bpx parm member does, it contains the ZFS file system information for DB2. And it allows the DB2 ZFS files to be mounted at IPL time. The IEF SSN member, so for example, I have the IEF SSN DB member. That member tells zOS which subsystems need to be initialized during system initialization so that zOS can identify DB2. The prod member is used to define DB2's APF libraries and linked lists. And last but not least, we have the IEA sys member. And the IEA sys member itself is the name of the system parameter list that gets loaded during the IPL process. So you can see we have our suffixes listed in each of our stanzas that are important to our DB2 installation. Right, moving on to some of the linked list options. So the linked list is basically a collection of libraries that contain system and user load modules. Having program libraries in the linked list allows programs to find load modules they're looking for without having to specify the library name explicitly in JCL statements. If the program libraries for DB2 are not in the linked list concatenation, any programs or procedures that require the load modules and those libraries will need to have either a job lib or a step lib statement to specify that library name. All you really need to know about linked lists is that it's kind of like a phone book. If you're a program and you're looking for a load module, you open up the phone book, you look down the list, and the phone book will tell you exactly how to get a hold of that load module. Right, on to DFSMS. So I do not claim to be a DFSMS expert, so I'm going to make this really quick. DFSMS helps simplify storage management and makes more efficient use of your system space and resources. ACS stands for automatic class selection, and these ACS routines are used to determine SMS classes and storage groups for all new dataset allocations. And these ACS routines will either need to be created, or the logic of your current routines will need to be adjusted to handle DB2 datasets that need to be SMS managed if they haven't already been adjusted to do so. So since DB2 version 10, the DB2 catalog and the DB2 directory need to be SMS managed. Okay, so now we're kind of getting to the point where I spent a lot of my time with the installation. So DSN-TINST is a member in the DB2 library SDSN CList, and it provides an aid in the installation of DB2 by producing a panel-driven interface when executed. When you go through all of the panels, when you execute that DSN-TINST CList, and when you put the appropriate information for your environment, that is going to generate a tailored install jobs for you to run. So it'll eventually output a bunch of jobs for you to go through with those specifications that you made during that panel. But before you can execute the DSN-TINST member, DB2's ISPF libraries will need to be allocated to your ISPF environment. So in my case, I chose to create a TSO logon proc to be able to allocate those ISPF libraries. And here's kind of an example of, well, I guess it is an example of the first screen that you're going to run across when you execute that DSN-TINST member. So this is the first panel, and I chose not to use zOS MF with my installation because I wanted to get, a behind the scenes look at the installation process, but some of this information might look familiar. So at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about different types of installation, as well as if we were in data sharing mode. So you can see here that I'm going to do a fresh install. And then I'm also not going to be in data sharing mode. A little bit further down on line 4, my DB2 libraries are going to have the DSN-D10 high-level qualifier. So that's going to be for your SDSN load, SDSN SAMP, and those are libraries that are given to you with the product. So IBM is going to give you those libraries. They're going to just be default members, and you can, adjust them as needed to newer libraries if you choose to do so. So with the line 6, you'll see if I wanted to make changes to my SDSN SAMP library, and I wanted to be able to save those libraries without, running over what DB2 development is going to give me through the maintenance cycle, I'm going to allocate a new library so I can contain those changed members. So I'm going to still give it the high-level qualifier of DSN-D10, but the data set's going to be dsnd10.new.sdsn-samp. So it's going to contain, my changed members that aren't going to run over what DB2 development gives me. Now, the 2 members down at the bottom, DSN-TIDXA, is a default parameter list that you can supply as an input member. And this is going to make all of the parameters in the following panels those default values. So if you want to make changes to the default input member and have those changes saved, that's where you're going to fill out line 9 with the member name. And that member name is going to be created for you. So DB2, or I guess the CList, is going to create that member with your changes to that input file. And those changes are going to be saved, and you can use that member at a later point in time if you choose to do so. So to recap the DSN-TINST CList, so we're going to execute that C list, and then we're going to be brought to those panels, and we're going to fill out the panels with what we need for our DB2 installation. We can choose to accept the defaults, or we can make changes if we want to, and we're going to navigate through those panels and put in our appropriate information. Once we finish the panels with all of our informations, that C list is going to start generating jobs with our customizations. So once you finish up the last panel and you hit enter, you're going to get a bunch of messages on your screen that's saying that, oh, I'm outputting your, customized member to this library and this member. And then that's going to entail, all of the JCL that is needed for us to install DB2. And so whenever I first started with DB2 and in this installation process, I thought that when I entered in all of my parameters into the panel, that it was going to be like a permanent sort of thing. It's not. You can always go back and change it at a later point in time. And even when you go and look at all of your JCL, you can change all of that before you submit it. So just because if you make a mistake in the panels and you know that you made a mistake, it can be adjusted. So these are all of the members that are going to be outputted with this C list. So it's going to have all of our customizations that we've added into those panels in every single job. So every single job has its own sort of, role. Like DSN TUJ or DSN TIJUZ is going to be your subsystem parameters, and that's going to contain all of the parameters that are necessary for that job. If we change anything, it's going to have our changes. If we accepted the default on stuff, it's going to have a default. So each job has its own role, and all of these jobs are going to be outputted to that library that you specified in the panels. So for instance, in my installation, all of these jobs were outputted to dsnd10.new.sdsn samp. And then you're also going to have some members that are going to go to, new.sdsn temp. And I think that that's to make the C list available to TSO and batch users, I believe. So I don't really use SUSN temp. I usually mainly use the SUSN SAMP for my installation of DB2. All right, so there's a ton of parameters that you're going to run into when you're going through the C list, and it can be extremely overwhelming. But I worked up the definitive guide to understanding the C list, and I've condensed the information down to one slide. And I spent a lot of time on this. So, if you want to take a screenshot or whatever, please do so. So here you go. Super simple, right? So I don't really have a cheat code for this. As you can see, it can be quite overwhelming. When I first took over DB2 for the two guys on my team, I was put, at the keyboard, and this is kind of what it felt like I was doing. I felt like I was kind of navigating a plane. And I was the first pilot, and my captain retired. I was new, and it was overwhelming. But I think, by being curious and by being persistent, it is really a valuable skill to have, especially for those who are new to IBMZ. Being able to have that curiosity to learn more really will set you far into your career. So one of the biggest challenges that I faced with installing DB2, does anybody have an idea of, some of the challenges that you faced in your environment? Because it might be similar. Because for me, it was naming conventions. Understanding the naming conventions of everything on the system, it was so overwhelming to be able, and I didn't even know where anything was. Like whenever I got on the system, like it was really hard to be able to see like, okay, I'm looking for something that's this, but I don't even know where to start to even look for it. So it was definitely a struggle to be able to, start learning, all of the naming conventions that are in the system. But there are a few things that could help out with you in your DB2 for zOS subsystem. So there's actually a member that you can use to export the settings of a current DB2 subsystem. So if you happen to have, an already existing DB212, DB213, you can run this member and it's going to display all of the parameters for your DB2 for zOS subsystem. So if you are wanting to do a new install, if you're wanting to, do an install on your own, maybe you have a test bed that you could do that in. Being able to export the settings of an existing DB2 and then utilizing those parameters to make the install will definitely help you into your installation journey. If there's not a customized DB2 that you have access to, the DSN TIDXA member is a good starting point. It contains all of the default parameters, so you could always start there. And if you need to make any changes along the way, you can utilize that member saving sort of process or functionality to be able to save your changes if you want to be able to save them. And then whenever you have your jobs in your SDSN SAMP output, it's always a good idea to double check those installation jobs that the C list generates, just to make sure that it's what you're wanting to submit. Okay, so all together now. So this is kind of a diagram of everything that we've kind of talked about, from starting with the SMPE installation all the way to having our installed jobs, our customized installed jobs. So we start with our DB213 product code on the left-hand side. We're going to have our input member. That's going to be our default if we want it to be our DSN TIDXA, or if we have a customized one, we can utilize that as well. Our DSN TINS C list is going to live in that SDSN C list. So we're going to, execute that C list, and we're going to go through all of the panels. And then eventually we're going to have an output that's going to go to your SDSN SAMP. And so when your SDSN SAMP has the output, it's going to be that, if you were to have changed the default member and wanted to save that information to a new member, that new member is going to be created in SDSN SAMP. Whereas with new SDSN SAMP, that's going to contain all of our JCL, our customized JCL that is required for us to run to install the subsystem. And then the SDSN SAMP has to do with the C list, not used. I don't really use it. And then if you choose to do zOS MF, you're going to have different libraries to do the install for you. Since I didn't do that, I'm not going to touch upon it. But yeah, we'll go a little bit into what those jobs are creating with your DB2 installation. So submitting the jobs, pretty straightforward. If you need to modify the jobs, now is the time to do so. The IBM DB2 version 13 installation and migration guide is going to have recommendations on what order to submit these jobs. So it's going to tell you exactly step by step what you need to do. Like you need to run this member first, you need to run this member second. If this member gets the return code 12 or return code 8, you need to do this step in order to go back to, recreate the object that you're creating, and then go back to this step to, start the process again. So it really is a detailed list of how to, follow the installation of the subsystem. And it's pretty straightforward. At least it was for me. So when the install is complete, whenever you run through all of those jobs that are needed for to start your subsystem, your subsystem is going to be at function level 501. And function levels have to do with continuous delivery. And in DB212, continuous delivery was introduced. And it is a method of getting new function into the market in a more timely manner and than the previous method that were used in prior versions. So if you have any further questions on this, we can have a discussion after the session on continuous delivery if you have any questions there. So while you're submitting these jobs, your items, your system objects, such as your active logs, your zparms, your buffer pools are getting set up in this process. DB2 is a team player, and it works better with friends. The true capabilities of DB2 are not realized until you connect it to other powerful subsystems and facilities. DB2 supports connections to application servers and transaction processors such as IMS and CICS. DB2 has an incredibly robust security layer that can be extended by using the operating system security server. In my case, it was RACF. DB2's performance can be monitored and fine-tuned by extracting insights found in the SMF records. So if you wanted to install any of these, facilities or products with your DB2, you're going to have different jobs to submit, and you're going to have different processes as well. These are some of, a few examples of this, crossed system connectivity. Okay, so now we're here. Woohoo! We're ready to start it up. So we talked about, our parm life changes, and it will require an IPL if you are unable to, dynamically load those parm life members that we updated or created. So if you're unable to dynamically load, IPL it, or else your DB2 subsystem start is going to fail. So once you get the subsystem up, it's going to be a start DB2 command. You can issue it from the syslog, and it'll start outputting messages to your syslog, and you'll eventually be looking for, it's up and it's listening on this port. And if you're new to DB2, you can learn a lot from the IVPs. They're installation verification programs. And IVPs, it shows you how things are put together and how things work. So don't skip out on these if you're wanting to learn more about your subsystem. As a beginner, running through these IVPs is what really helped me start grasping how DB2 works, because it really just starts building sample applications, sample database objects, and it really gives you a good idea of how your system is put together. I should say DB2 for zOS system. Okay, so some key takeaways that I learned from this process. So you all saw the cockpit with a bunch of parameters. It can be overwhelming at times, especially when you have, a million one things that you're doing and learning. Just take things one step at a time. And if you come across an issue, don't be afraid to ask questions. I know this is beaten over our heads, but it's so true. There's real value through struggling through a problem. But on the same note, don't underestimate the value of, the expediting of your learning experience by someone who's already done the struggle for you. I don't know how many times I've spent hours and hours and hours on an issue only to get a coworker involved and then have them solve it in like 5 and 10 minutes. And they'll say, well, I wish you would have come to me sooner, but So you didn't have to spend all this time, figuring it out. But it's all a balancing act of, doing your due diligence, but also leaning on the people around you and their expertise. So you're going to learn a lot through this process. And I wish I had done an installation earlier on when I first started working at IBM, so that I could get a bigger picture of how things were put together. So if you have a sandbox environment and have the opportunity to install DB2, it will really help expedite your learning. Same goes for the IVPs. If you have, the ability to run through those IVPs, I would highly suggest doing so. And then lastly, beware the dangers of, because that's the way we've always done it. Just because it's been done a certain way for a long time doesn't mean it is always the right answer. And as you gain more experience, you will start to see how you can improve things and be a contributor to making something better for yourself or your team or maybe even your organization. Okay, so in summary, we learned how to plan out what's entailed in planning out and preparing the system. We have to order DB213 from Shopsy and then upload that product to our zOS system and then perform the SMPE installation. And then it gets to the DB2 installation. And there's going to be some zOS customizations that might need to happen. We're going to execute our DSN TINST C-list member so that we can get access to those panels and start filling out our parameters that we want to populate into our JCL members. And then we're going to submit those installation jobs that get auto-populated with our parameters. And then optionally, you can connect your DB2 to other subsystems such as IMS or KICS, or set up even more more security. I keep saying more security features. And then you're going to start your DB2 for zOS. And then you're going to test that subsystem functionality using the IVPs. Some additional resources that you can look into if you're curious about this process. What's new? DB2 version 13 for zOS. I've talked a little bit about the installation and migration guide. That was kind of like my holy grail book for this whole process for me. I read a lot about it. And then the program directory is also a great way to kind of learn how to go through that SMPE install of the DB2 product. And I believe there's also some intro to DB2 for zOS documentation that I did not put on there, but that is also another great resource to kind of go through to kind of understand, what is DB2 for zOS and why we use it and what are some of the components that are needed for its, usability. And yeah, that's about it. So I really appreciate you guys hanging in there and listening. I know it's kind of after lunchtime, so hopefully I didn't put you all to sleep, but I do really appreciate the time today.
Thank you so much, Anna. The siesta comes after lunch, I believe. So we'll do that in a minute. Yeah. We've only got about 5 or 6 minutes left. We've actually got a few questions in the chat. There's two
Great.
that are more general questions from Atul, and there's one which is a bit more specific from Shivam. I'll do Atul's first, just because Shivam's might require like more of possibly a discussion between the two of you in depth. It might be a bit more technical, but we'll do Atul's first, just as it's probably a bit more, I guess, easily digestible. Are you seeing many early career people being attracted to a career as a DB2 systems programmer? And if so, what is it you think attracts them?
Yeah, so I think so. I see a lot of newer people in the DB2 for zOS realm. I'm communicating with a lot of, new to Z DB2 for zOS hires in IBM. And I think, something that, could potentially be an attraction for them is there's a lot of, AI capability that's starting to get integrated with DB2 for zOS. AI is kind of like the hot ticket right now. And it's kind of like the it technology that everyone wants to work on. So I think maybe that is an attracting factor. And then also, DB2 for zOS has been around for so long. And, it's the primary relational database of, the Z architecture. So I was really attracted to DB2 for zOS because I had, some experience with relational databases. So I got, interested in, the relational database, no matter what it was, which was DB2 for zOS. So it could be, people are really interested in what data is and they're wanting to learn more about it at an enterprise computing level.
I think it's also databases are one of those things where there really is a kind of a clear well, often there's a clear way to make things more efficient. So there's a lot of gratification
Yeah.
that comes from that. Whereas with something like security, sometimes you feel like rude, I'm making things difficult for people because that is how security works. There's less potential gratification, even though on paper, I think sometimes security sounds trendier. It's the fulfillment.
Yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
and so Atul's second question actually is
Mhm.
has the installation process for DB2 changed much over the various releases that have come out, over the years? Has that changed? Or is it still, I guess, generally the same structure that you'd follow? Because obviously the documentation you'd referenced, that could be old, but if the process hasn't really changed, then it's still relevant,
Mhm. Yeah. So, from what I know is that there was a new version of DB2 that would come out like every 3 years, I think. With DB2 version 12, continuous delivery was introduced, and that's where new features and functions are introduced through the maintenance cycle. And so it had been like 6 or 7 years since we got a new DB2 version from DB2 version 12 being generally available to DB2 version 13. So I would say on that front, we're having less DB2 versions being introduced to market, but also it was the same. For me, it was the same installation from DB2 12 and DB2 13 because that new continuous delivery model was introduced. So I don't have experience prior to DB2 version 12. So for me, it was the same. Something that has been introduced maybe a few years ago was the option to install through zOS and math. When I don't think whenever DB212 was introduced, which I think was in 2016, they had the COS and math install. But that is also an option that you can do. It's just not something that I executed in my installation, but that is also a different process that you can do when it comes to your subsystem. And I think it's more of, provides, I think a lot of people have been using the term easy button when it comes to install because you're not really going through ISPF to be able to install. So for me, the installation process didn't change. But if you were leveraging the zOS MF install, I would imagine it's going to be a bit different.
And there's nothing negative about using an easy button. I mean, that's just
Oh
engineering, isn't
no.
it?
Oh,
Minimal
absolutely.
effort for maximum output.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And
Um,
then like
and
there are some, oh sorry.
no, go
Let
for
me
it.
just Yeah, there are some, customers out there that have, hundreds of subsystems and like why would you want to individually, upgrade every subsystem when you can use COSMF to help you upgrade? So anyways,
Absolutely.
that's all I have.
No, yeah, it makes total sense. I'm just conscious we've got about 1 minute left. We might overrun
Oh,
slightly, but Shivam's question is, which SQL level is needed when we are moving to the V12 FL510 from FL500? But I think that's more
so
technical. So
yeah, so this has to do with, the continuous function levels, continuous delivery. SQL level can be, I think it can be whatever you want it to be. The only thing that has to be your function level has to be 510 in order to get to version 13 if you're migrating. Your SQL level can be whatever you want it to be. So hopefully that kind of answered, because you have your SQL level, your applicant path, those can be different than your function level. So only the function level of your subsystem has to be at V12 function level 510 in order to migrate to version 13 function level 500, if that makes sense.
If I'm honest, for me, it doesn't make much sense, but I'm not,
Okay.
I'm also not a database guy. I am learning, but yeah, Shivam said that's good. Thanks, Anna. So clearly
Oh, good.
it's answered his
Okay, great.
question. I think that's the only other question we had. I put a big old essay in just about from a security perspective, like you'd said, definitely worth reaching out to the security admin or engineering team and discussing. I like you, Anna, keep falling into the trick of the trap of referring to RACF. I know there are other ESMs. You've got ACF2 and Top Secret, but
Yep.
the general process of basically ask first, maybe set up that dialogue is definitely important because I think there's a lot of security people, myself included, who don't understand many other departments and many other departments who don't understand security, and it's always good to kind of build that camaraderie. Um,
Hmm.
I'll just remind everyone, I know it's on the screen, and please do fill in the feedback form. And actually, we just had Satish has said, I'm in my second year undergraduate degree in computer science at university. I'm a novice learning about mainframe technology. What advice would you give to a student who wants to learn about databases? It's a brilliant
Well,
question.
okay. Yes.
I
Oh,
was just going to
go
say,
ahead.
straight off the bat, it's and I imagine Anna's going to say this since she was a two-time winner. Is Z Explorer or Master the Mainframe is a brilliant place to start. But I'll let Anna answer that herself. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, I mean, Niall answered it perfectly. Going and doing the Z Explorer challenges are definitely helpful with to learn more about DB2 for zOS. If you're wanting to learn more about just relational databases in general, and I feel like, with relational databases, they're all practically the same, like it's the same concept. And, learning about DB2 for zOS, you can go and learn, something different, DB2 LEW if you want, or, any other relational database, right? You can take what you learn there and apply it to other relational database management systems. So if you're wanting to learn more about relational database, I would imagine there's courses on like Udemy or Coursera. I think that's another one. If you just look up, relational database, in a Google search, you should be able to find, some courses that can tell you more about, just relational database management systems in general. But if you're wanting to learn more about DB2 for zOS, Z Explorer is a great option.
And like Anna said, there are resources elsewhere. I mean, Udemy's a good one. I know there's if you're sort of specifically looking at SQL, Python sort of things, you can also go to W3 Schools. I found that to be quite useful. They have a lot of try it yourself buttons where you can change something, and it will basically, as you change it, it will in real time show you what the result would be, so you can tell whether you've broken it or whether it's working correctly. And definitely one to look at. I think we'll have to wrap it up here. I don't want us to go too far over. I'm just conscious of time, but thank you so much for the session, Anna. Sasish has also said thanks, and Atul has. I can echo this as well. Atul has said you explained the illustration beautifully. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a fantastic session. I've just been submitting my own feedback for this session, and I've just said it's no wonder you got recognised so highly by the DB2 stream, and both 101 and 10 both 101 and DB2 streams would be so lucky to have you back. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had a great time, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, well, you too. And I think it's just worth saying now, because we're at the last few sessions of the day and the last day of GSC's virtual event. If you have time, please tune into the final session, which is the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's basically like what did we do well this event? What could we do better? And that's good for obviously both speakers like yourself, Anna, and our audience to attend, in order to gauge, where do we grow? Where do we do more of or less of in the future? But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you all in subsequent sessions. And thank you again, Anna.
Yep.
Okay, thanks everyone. All the best. Have a good day. Bye bye.